Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dominique Morgan. I am the founder and president of Queer People of Color Nebraska. Although it was my inspiration and my belief that QPOC was necessary, QPOC belongs to this community. I am born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, North Omaha specifically, and for many parts of my life, the intersectionalities of my queerness and my blackness did not seem attainable for me. I recall at a very young age, I came out at 14, and it was at that age where I really felt like I had to make the decision to be a very good and upstanding young black man or a very dynamic and successful queer person. And the queerness seemed more attainable for me at that time, and I ran with it like a baton in the Olympics. However, I never reached the finish line. I was always striving, always searching, trying to figure out where I belonged, and it wasn't until I was able to understand the intersections, and actually I first heard the acronym QPOC in October of 2013. I was sitting on a planning panel for Corn This Way, and the amazing Drew Heckman, who created Queer Youth Nebraska, referred to me as a QPOC individual. And I said, well, what'd you call me? I was like, is this a slur? Like, what's happening? What's going on? And as we spoke, I remember crying in that moment, like having tears come to my face, because it was the first time everything about me came together in one piece. And it really became a movement for me at that moment. I was the president of Heartland Pride at that time, and there was some great work that we did, great work they're still doing, but during my tenure, I was allowed to create Youth Pride, which is going into its 4th year this year. We were able to write an amazing scholarship program, but the intersections of race and queerness were hard to bring to fruition because Pride overall is supposed to support the mainstream, the popular group of people. And when we talk about queerness, when we talk about popularity, when we talk about mainstream, we are talking about whiteness. And usually, and more specifically, not only whiteness, but white cis men. So this was this square, which was Heartland Pride, and I was trying to take race, which was this circle, and trying to shove it in, and it just wasn't working. So we have QPOC, like our little festive logo, trying to get all the browns and all the shades that our people represent. If you go to places like Atlanta, Baltimore, Boston, you have Black Pride events. Nebraska, I don't feel like we have the, what's the word I want to use, the privilege to be able to separate our brownness and our blacknesses. So QPOC felt appropriate because we are still considered the other. This first part of the presentation is a presentation I've done before in pieces, specifically when QPOC first started, because the conversation was, why do you need to create something different? Why can't you all just come join the majority? Why can't you all just come bring your diversity here? The door's open, no one will join us. It's not our fault the whole room is white. We want brown people to come, they just don't show up. And in their good-natured hearts, they believe that's really a thing. Diversity has to be intentional. It has to be intentional. For a long time in my life, I was one of the most, we call the people who are aware of causes woke. I was not just sleep, I was sleeping beauty type sleep to the issues that affected my people. And I recall when Nebraska was discussing affirmative action, really feeling like, oh my God, I don't want to be given a job just because of my skin color. And of course they're going to judge me on paper the same way they would judge someone else. In reality, when we're talking about adding brown faces and voices to a conversations, sometimes you have to go do a search. Sometimes you have to go to them. An open door policy, how many times have y'all walked past an open door, but it not seem welcoming? You ever seen a scary movie? That door is always open. We're always screaming, don't go in there. And when they do, they end up chopped up and bloody. I'm not saying that for brown folks. That's what happens when we go into these circles. But honestly, when we are asked to take ourselves into spaces that make us uncomfortable, we are putting our bodies in harm. these environmental situations are what we're going to talk about now when it comes to the necessity of QPOC only spaces. We get it. White people, y'all didn't ask for privilege. Some folks, if they could take off their privilege and put it to the side, I believe they would. But if we're talking about privilege, and if you understand privilege as a system, you know that it exists and it just is, right? And a lot of times when we talk about privilege, you get those faces, you get those conversations of, well, I would change it, and I'm not like those people, and this, and this, and this. It is very difficult to discuss your race and how your identities come together while you're trying to mitigate the guilt and the feelings of white people in the room. QPOC only spaces are necessary because these are the opportunities for us to speak freely and openly without worrying about possibly hurting our friends, our partners sometimes, people that we have strong relationships with. Understand that the intersectionality of race does not negate the strong bonds we have, but you have to understand that it brings a completely different lens to our experiences. White guilt is a form of self-congratulation where whites initiate compassion policies towards people of color to showcase their innocence to racism. We live in Omaha where many of our organizations and our events are privately funded. I would say Omaha lives off of white guilt. You have people who go into spaces, who write checks, who do good things with their monies, but they are not from those spaces. They do not allow those voices to be amplified. They go into those spaces to do the will for which they feel like those spaces need. Now, are there positive outcomes outside of that? Absolutely. But I believe when you are talking about marginalized communities, you cannot erase the fact that the answers are there. These people want to do better. These people know what they need to have the success that I believe every human really wants. The issue is that their voice is down here. And the average person who does not identify as a person of color, their voice is automatically up here. So the conversation in that situation is not how you put your voice in that place, but how do you help assist and amplify the voice that's already going on. This is a fun, memes are a way that I get through some of my worst days going on the internet. And this is what I found. And these are things that I've actually heard people say. I didn't ask to be white. I don't see race. Let's talk about that for a second. If you don't see race, you are blind. I mean, textbook, legally blind. Other than that, we all see race. Now, with the conversation that all people cannot be racist, but all people do have biases, yes? So to say that when I look at this audience of people, I don't see that there are, for me, two people who present as black folks. And I use the word present because present is how you perceive. You never know what's out here, right? For me to say that that's not a thing that happens automatically would be a lie. You see color. You see these things that are in front of you. I wish I was exotic. Have you ever had anyone, for the non-people of color watching this or in the audience, has anyone ever walked up and touched your hair and told you that you just are so exotic and so different? Anyone ever ask you, everybody asks you where you're from? And when you say I'm from Omaha, they don't know, where are you from? I helped build a school in Africa on my vacation. So that completely wipes away any potential of racism or biases that I may have. I'm tired of being seen as the singular representative of my race, authoritatively speaking for every other person of color in the planet. Could you imagine being this spokesperson for how you identify? And what you say and what you do reflects your entire people. As a person of color, specifically a person of color navigating in QPOCs, in queer spaces, 9 times out of 10, we are put in these token positions. I still am, and have been for about 4 or 5 years, the go-to black gay guy here in Omaha. And at first it was cool because you're like, oh, I'm popular. Oh, they want to hear my voice. And then you're in these rooms and they ask a question and the whole room looks at you when it comes about race. Or when they want to figure out how to add diversity, they all look towards you. And so something that I have woven into any time I present, teach, facilitate, honestly, just conversations with anyone, I can only speak from my own experience. Do not take anything I tell you about how I've gotten to this place and apply it to any other gay black male that you run into. Because 99% of our experiences can be different, but that 1% can completely change the trajectory and POV of how we've lived, right? And so when we talk about stories and we talk about narratives, everyone's story is important. And when you apply one singular narrative to an entire group of people, you erase all these stories. When you erase someone's story, you erase their existence. Now, this could be on purpose, it could be on accident, but it's what is taking place, right? I don't know everything about race, and I need space to be able to make mistakes and learn. There are so many times people say, well, Dom, you should know. And as I've grown and as I have developed in how I see myself as a black man, my ideas and my understandings change. And for me to feel like I have to give you what you perceive as fact in that moment is a very difficult burden for one to carry. And I deserve a space where I can learn and understand about my people. I'll be 35 in a couple of weeks. For the longest time, I had no knowledge or understanding of black queer folks' influences in history, specifically in civil rights and social justice, which is where my heart and passions lie. So to go 30, 33 years without that understanding, how can I possibly tell you about what my people represent? One, their conversations are not a part of the mainstream. 2, even in the 28 or 29 days that Black history represents, queer black folks are still not talked about. And last but not least, let's talk about access. If you don't have internet, if you don't have people who have a global understanding, a range of knowledge, who are able to bestow these things on you. I've had the privilege to be able to attend conferences, to meet with individual people who've been able to give me this knowledge. I know many young people that I meet on a daily basis who do not. Yet and still they live in this identity. They breathe in this identity. And I would challenge you that for you to not know how your people, your identities have affected the change that surrounds you, leaves you in this limbo gray area that is very uncomfortable. We ask why young folks are not a part of these movements. It's because they don't feel like these movements speak to them, because we haven't taken the time to show them how who they are has been a part of these movements from the very beginning. We don't see trans black folks in these pride parades. Well, it's because you want to erase Marsha P. Johnson out of the conversation. It's because you will create an entire movie called Stonewall, rewrite it to where Timmy from the Midwest threw the first rock and started our revolution, when we know it was trans people of color who were out there kicking in these doors, fighting with the police, saying that we are here and you will recognize us no matter whether you like it or not. While the rest of the world is working overtime to put white people at the center of every conversation, it is okay that spaces don't exist without them. I believe any type of minority deserves a space to build themselves up. The Women March that took place recently, necessary. When we talk about the NAACP parade, when we talk about Juneteenth events, necessary, right? When we talk about pride, extremely necessary. But pride is not an end-all be-all to what the queer community is. And in my perspective, QPOC spaces, specifically talking about Nebraska, were necessary because we were expecting young people of color who identify as queer to get on the front line, to be able to speak at Senate presentations, to be able to be revolutionaries, to be able to check themselves out of the everyday issues they're dealing with, whether it's poverty, whether it's homelessness, whether it's issues with their family, and be able to focus on, at the time, the big conversation was passing same-sex marriage. Now, ask yourself, because we're going to come back to this, since same-sex marriage has passed, what has been the big thing that the queer community has advocated for overall? There hasn't been anything. From my perspective, this is why. In our community, whiteness is seen as the maximum space that you can achieve, and also straightness in a way, in a shape, and a form. When we talk about people in the queer community who do not identify as a person of color, what was the one thing separating them and their straight counterparts from being as normal as possible? Being able to be married. When you took that issue out of the situation, we're pretty much the same now. What do I have to picket about? What do I have to march about? What do I have to go to my legislators about? The issue that took place in the black and the brown communities were, yes, we could get married, but we were still seen as other. Trans women of color were still being murdered every single day, and no one was speaking about it. Queer black youth are put out of their homes. 1 in 3 are homeless. Still. So we applauded and we congratulated, and it was lovely when marriage passed. But for many of us within the queer community who identified as a person of color, our issues were still here. And the uncomfortable situation that took place, that we no longer had a united voice with the rest of our queer brothers and sisters. You know, if the ship is wrecking and you get on the boat to safety, I mean, you're like, okay, I wish you would have made it to the boat, but I'm on the boat and I'm breathing, I'm good, right? It's kind of what happened. That's how I felt. And we're still out here with our life jackets, asking for y'all to reel us in. Derailment bingo, this is another meme that I saw. And this speaks to the conversation that it also, although you can be called to the carpet about not understanding diversity and not engaging in diversity in a meaningful way, it is not our job to teach you how to be diverse. It is not our job to educate you on our experience. Now, for some of us, myself included, I enjoy using my story to create change. That's a decision I made. That's not everybody's position. And sometimes, depending on the day, it's not mine either. When I'm sitting at Red Lobster eating all-you-can-eat shrimp, I don't want to talk about my blackness. I'm here for these shrimp and this hot butter and to chill out and hang out and enjoy my day. I just want to live. I don't want to put on a lecture. I don't want to explain to you about my lineage. I don't want to talk about QPOC issues because you want to know. And then when I tell you no, well, how will I ever learn? Google is so amazing. Oh my God. You sprinkle in a little Netflix and a little Hulu and a few documentaries, and then if you actually go to areas where black and brown folks are, I just gave y'all a recipe to be diverse. Write it down. Because colorism exists between us too. You have to understand that although our queerness is here again, we're talking about intersectionalities, right? It's something I saw a couple of weeks ago where they were having this party where light-skinned girls got in free until midnight and dark-skinned girls had to pay more. Because when you talk about our history, all the way going back to slavery with who was in the house and who was out in the cotton fields, who was valuable, who was not valuable, color and hue played a part to it. So within our own community, we have to unpack, what does that mean for us? How do we get past the point where we judge each other and our value on how straight our hair is, or how good our hair is, how long it is, how light we are, how skinny we are, how much we resemble mainstream media? And that's a conversation that amongst us we have to work out and figure out. It's going to take time, but I truly believe unless we have opportunities to do that amongst us. I don't know if, I grew up in a house where mom was like, we took care of issues at home. You be out in public, you do something wrong. My mom wasn't going to chastise me there. She ain't going to do it in front of a whole bunch of people. When I got home, I knew she was going to get me together. Black and brown folks need a chance for us to have our home, to get each other together, to call each other out, to bring forth the issues that we are dealing with in a space that is safe for us, so that we do not do that in a way that we are putting that on display for other people who may misjudge the conversation, rearrange the narrative to suit them. Sometimes we have to get together to remember that we exist. One of my favorite movies is The Color Purple. And the scene when the sisters are separating and they do this hand clap because even within their home, this is how they saw each other. They were two people who saw the beauty in each other in a world of people who didn't see beauty in them at all. So to have the idea that they were not going to have that anymore was devastating for them, and that's why they separated them. Within our community, I can tell you how many times I'll go to a place and I'll text somebody like, are you going? I don't want to be the only one. Or you show up and you see one and it's a hug, it's an embrace, at least it's going to be the nod, I see you. Because sometimes if we don't recognize each other, no one else will. We need to be reminded that within these intersectionalities and these subdivisions of the queer community, although how it's represented in the public eye, we represent some of these sections also. Butchness and queerness and being femme and being pansexual and asexual and trans come in many skin tones also. Co-signing ally as an identity while nothing concrete in your life connects you to any social justice work is infuriating, it is disrespectful, and it is just wrong. Being an ally is not a label you get to just have. It's how you live your life. I truly believe that. I call myself an advocate for you specifically. That is how I try to live my life. That is how I judge what I do in the day. When I'm at a table having a conversation, am I speaking up or making space for young folks to be heard? Am I always making sure that young people are presented in whatever media I'm involved in? It's something that I constantly keep at the forefront of my mind because that's an identity that I've taken on. You cannot be an ally and not understand what a real ally is. And sometimes a real ally is sitting down, being quiet, and making space. Not even making up space, not taking up space is really what I want to say. That's the way to be the best ally sometimes. Right? But again, like with any identity, you have to figure out what that looks like for you. And surround yourself with good folks who are within that identity. Find good allies, good folks who you know are doing the work, who represent the type of activities you want to engage in, and find those people and connect with them. Even if you can't physically be in the same city, again, the internet is amazing because it allows you to reach out and understand and speak to people in ways you never could. Preston Mitchum is an amazing black queer man that lives in Baltimore. And I'm here in Omaha, Nebraska. And what I can tell you via Facebook, I've gained so much information from this man because, again, I say the answers are always in us, but sometimes we have to hear it put in certain ways. And sometimes it has to be presented to us in certain ways. And he's given me so many aha moments about myself. Creating Change in January of this year, I was able to meet him in person and thank him. He doesn't know me. I'm one of the 10,000 people who follow him online. But I saw the work he did. I saw how he presented himself, and I said, these are things that I think are what fall in line with how I want to present myself as an advocate. So there's so many opportunities to understand what an ally looks like. Again, we need to find community within ourselves and not through others. What does being a queer person of color mean to us? Not what the outsiders put labels on, not what they think our marches, our parades, our parties should look like, not what our social gatherings should be, how we should dress, how we should speak. I intentionally wore, well actually not intentionally, this is what I wear. I will sit in a meeting with Warren Buffett and wear my hat and my t-shirt and do the work that I do. This is how I come to the table. This is Dominique Morgan. This is my authentic self. I love it. I'm proud of me. Now, my husband can tell you I have a closet full of clothes that are shiny and festive. But I am always looking within myself to see what makes me happy, what makes me comfortable. Am I putting this on because I decide to? Am I putting this on because I think this is what a good version of myself should be? And I think the editing and the understanding of my queerness and my blackness has come from being allowed to dissect it by myself and with my other friends who fall within those identities. And to have some pushback and to have some growth and to have some really good dialogue, we need just some privacy. The only way to fight racism within the queer community is to build QPOC-only spaces and show that we are here and offer examples of why we are marginalized within the community. We can't say that we are fighting and we are dismantling racism within the queer community and then not talk about the fact that brown and black folks who identify as queer are left out of the conversation. You can't do both. You can't. And your queerness does not automatically make you woke. I'm sorry to bring that to you, but that is not automatic. Because also the other conversation is when you talk about QPOC spaces, because there are a lot of brown and black folks who still have no understanding about how they are being marginalized, how they marginalize their brown brothers and sisters, and how they play into this system that brings forth this narrative that we are other. There's a large period in my time when people would say to me, Dom, I wouldn't let anybody else black in my house, but you're good. You're one of the good ones. I'll let you be here. Or why aren't they like you? Why won't they just read and get themselves together? Why won't they step up and try to be better? And for a long time, those statements made me feel good. Bought into it. Would actually approach and treat people in a very unkind way because I judge my experience and how I came to my understanding and my growth to theirs. You can't do that. Everybody's road, everybody's travel is different. We have to respect it. Before we go on to this, I also want to put this out here. Recently, Moonlight was released, and I think it's one of the most pivotal, awe-inspiring examples of black male queerness that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I recall watching this movie 3 times in a row, 3 days consecutively, and I never heard the word DL said. I never heard anybody be called down low in the movie. I also never really heard anybody identify as anything but just themselves. And that was very moving for me. Because I also then realized that I had never heard a white man who was not out be called DL. That negative connotation was never put on that face, that identity. And it kind of shook me to my core because I had bought into those conversations. I had judged people on how they came out and how they presented. And it was again within that QPOC only space. And I say it wasn't only QPOC folks in the room, but in that movie space, in that communal space, I feel like we were able to kind of erase everything around us. And we really gathered as one in those spaces those nights. A lot of awe-inspiring revelations came out. And that's just an example to me that we are always evolving. We're always growing, but if we're not given the opportunity to create spaces for that to happen, we're not going to become the community we say we want to be. Because also, I love my queer brothers and sisters regardless of color. They're my family. We all fall under this umbrella. That being said, I want to feel like the way that I love and respect and lift them up, my people are looked at and understood and judged in the same fashion. My little festive thing here. First of all, Bear Rustin is my everything. I was at a national GLSEN facilitation event, and I was becoming a GLSEN facilitator, and they were talking about folks in history, and they said Bear Rustin. I was like, who? And so in this month of February, not only this month of February, I think anytime we talk about a civil rights activist who is seen as palpable to the common folks, we talk about Martin Luther King. There are so many times when you look at riots or demonstrations or the Black Lives Matter movement in general, I see so many people say, well, why can't they just be like Dr. King? Dr. King would be so ashamed of you. And I just be like, so when y'all met him, like, what was that like? Like, when y'all sat down and had a conversation with Dr. King about how he thought about his people, like, what went down? But furthermore, for me to realize then that this person who is seen as kind of the most popular black civil rights individual in our nation, maybe world, that there was a queer black man who was behind every strategic move he made. The fact that because they were so scared of Bear Rustin, they threatened to create a rumor that him and Dr. King were in a sexual relationship. And so to prevent this movement being derailed, Baird stepped down. He then came back when they wanted to do the March on Washington because he was needed again. He also, the black people from within the NAACP who tried to derail him, tried to rebuke him, tried to tear him down, when they came after those individuals in Senate, he stood up for them still. Because he said, they are treating you differently because you are black. And I bring that up because for a large part of the last 2 years, I feel like I've been heavily involved in issues that have affected the African American community. And there are many times, and black and brown folks watching this is where I'm going to call y'all to the carpet, where I felt like when there's been issues that have affected my queerness, they've left me hanging. I asked a question on Facebook the other day because we know, you may not know, and I'm going to let you know that when Trayvon Martin was murdered, that was when Alicia Garza, which we'll see her a little bit later, made the post about I love you and Black Lives Matter. Then another young lady turned that into a hashtag. The actual on-the-ground revolution piece of it happened when Mike Brown was murdered in Ferguson. I asked on Facebook about a week ago if Mike Brown had been an out, queer, black man, would this revolution have happened? I don't believe it. Now there's people who hopped on my post, of course, we see all people the same, blah, 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 blah. And I said, do you know that there's been 17 trans women of color murdered in the last 18 months, at least? I consider that an epidemic. Low-key genocide. Where y'all at? Is you mad or no? Do you recognize this? That your brothers, your sisters within this queer bubble are being murdered, target practice? It's a conversation. I cannot believe if 17 white women were murdered consecutively due to them being all redheads, that we would not be figuring out how to enact some law to protect redheads as an endangered species. And that's what's happening, right? So that's the other side of the coin when I talk about intersectionality, is that you feel like your overall queer community does not really have your back, but the overall community that you identify with your race also is leaving you in limbo. And then we're just there. So then we need these spaces, we need these conversations with us, because Sometimes we're the only ones who really can understand that. Marsha Pay It No Mind Johnson was the truth. The truth. A for real revolutionary. Because I think it's easy to be an activist and a person that usurps authority when everybody stands behind you and when it's cool and when it's fun. It's when you're standing alone. It's when your physical and your mental body can be harmed just by speaking and you still choose to speak, that I look at you and I say, I aspire to walk in those type of spaces. And again, this woman is erased from history consistently. And even in media, when they may get a person of color to play her, but it'll be a cis-identifying individual. And we know there are so many amazing trans women of color who are actresses. Representation goes down to the smallest thing to me. If you have the opportunity to make it happen, you should be taking the opportunity to do so. Back to the beginning when we talked about diversity being intentional. If you're not making that happen, you didn't want it to happen. Because like I said, I know 4 or 5 folks I can call up right now. And the thing is, we're at the point now when someone calls me, I was like, well, I won't do it, but this is who you should call. And if they can't do it, this is who you should call. Because I'm forcing people to stop using me as the go-to for my voice. And that's how we really start making change happen. We start pushing people to get uncomfortable. We start pushing people to use their network in a new way. Because a lot of time we go for the low-hanging fruit, right? It's easy. All of us are working. We got a lot of stuff going on. Going out of our bubble can be exhausting and being scary. We may have some issues with anxiety, all of these things that I recognize and understand. But we cannot be the complete community we say we want to be and not make these things happen. There's a documentary called Pay It No Mind, The Life and Times of Marsha P. Johnson, and there's an upcoming short film that actually a trans woman of color is playing Marsha. It was crowdfunded, so look for that online. And the thing is, also for me, Bayard Rustin died in 1987. Marsha died in 1992, and I was alive at these times, and I never heard these people's voices or their names. So the whole thing of this was, from the beginning to the end, ending with the Black Lives Matter movement, per se. Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrisse Cullors, they literally birthed the Black Lives Matter movement. When you look at what the Black Lives Matter movement looks like in the media, it is heteronormative. It's been taken over by black men specifically, black straight identifying men. Black cis straight identifying men. When this revolution was started by 3 women of color who identify as queer. When these riots, when these marches are taking forth, some of the most pivotal pictures I've seen has been a black woman standing between a police officer and her child, or her brother, or her husband. How do we erase all that is very clear and prevalent? How do we allow people to change that entire narrative? Because it's easy. Because when the mainstream has control of how the story is told, they will always have the power. And the reason I want to do this conversation is that the more that we share facts and truths and authentic stories that come from oneself, we can spread that conversation. So if you didn't know who started this movement, when you leave here, next time you're in a circle full of friends who are saying the wrong things, my call to action for you is to say, no, actually, it was Alicia Garza that was on the forefront of this. And then this happened, and then this happened. The next time one of your cousins, one of your friends jumps on Facebook and talks about how Martin Luther King saved us all, and you can say, well, there was also a queer black man who made this whole plan for him. And don't just stop with the people I've talked about in this presentation. Take time, Wherever your passions lie, I promise you there is a person of color who identifies as queer who's made an imprint on that lane. Arts, music, advocacy, social justice, education, architecture, they're there. Sometimes they haven't been able to speak their full, unmitigated voice, but history shows they existed and they were there. What now? Now we dismantle this idea of what queerness looks like. Now we, out of our mouths, express the fact that we are different and we are varied. And until we respect and we acknowledge all of these stories, all of these perspectives, all of these walks of life, we are not going to be the culture we say we want to be. I can't say that I am a humanitarian and erase a full spectrum of folks with how I speak and how I live. So next, we hold each other accountable. We hold ourselves accountable. We hold our community accountable. We hold our leaders accountable. Hold our media accountable. What are you watching? What are you listening to? What are you sharing with your friends on Facebook? You know? If you're a person who has an idea about a conversation, are you sending, are you contributing works and articles to different places? Are you just starting a blog to get it out there and express yourself? How are you taking your corner of the world and creating change? And a lot of times I think when we say change, people feel like, oh my God, I got to pay my bills, I got to take care of my kids, I got all this going on and you want me to do something else? I will close with this. When I talk to my students, who are all in youth prisons, some of them facing 20, 30, 100 years. I say to them, when you take a boulder and you drop it in a lake or a river, it falls in. It may make a few bubbles, but the ripple is pretty much gone. But if you take a tiny rock that's shaped just right, and you hit that thing right over the skim of that water, the area that it can cover and reach is you can't even imagine how much effect you can have over that space. And that's what change is. Change starts at home. How you speak, how you walk, how you talk, how you look at people. When someone smiles, smile back. I believe in opening doors for folks. I believe in just being kind. It doesn't hurt me to be kind. But also the call to action is to be kind to everyone, even when they don't look like you. Even when sometimes it makes you uncomfortable. Because I feel like change comes in that uncomfortable space. That's when we know change is really happening, right? Not asking you to put your body in harm's way. Not asking you to do something that would be detrimental to self. But go out of your way to do something different. Go out of your way to acknowledge someone who doesn't look like you. Go out of your way to help amplify the voice of someone you have privilege over. And we all have privilege, like it or not. Okay? So QPOC spaces are necessary. They're happening in Nebraska. And we are on the way to where we want to be. But it's a slow and winding road. And we need y'all to step back and give us the space to make that happen. And I call my brown brothers and sisters to the mat to say that I need you all to join me in these spaces so that we can have multiple points of views, so we can say that voices are being heard that really reflect the overall group that we represent. Again, my name is Dominique Morgan. My website is www.dominiquemorgan.com. You can find my email and all that good stuff on there if you have other questions about the presentation, if you would like the presentation sent to you, or any of those videos that I discussed. I thank you all for being an amazing audience. Thank you to this beautiful hotel for hosting us this afternoon. And y'all have a wonderful Black History Month. And thank you.